Hello and welcome. I am Jonathan Neal, Director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Representing the Environment. This is the 7th of the Arts and Cultural Conversations that we are hosting this fall. You can find out more and register for those conversations at cgu.edu/events, and you can find out more about our center and our art business and arts management programs at cgu.edu/CBMArts, CBMArts. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to please keep your microphones and your video off during the conversation. This will ensure that you only see the speakers on the screen and see and hear them regardless of the Zoom view that you have selected. If you have questions, please put those in the chat box and I will raise them as they come up throughout our conversation today with my friend Alexis Rockman. Alexis has lived and worked as an artist in New York City almost his entire career, with some ventures out into the wilds of the world, but recently is relocated to, is it Western Connecticut, Alexis?
Well, I'm actually in Manhattan right now during renovations, but it's in northwestern Litchfield County.
There you go. Alexis has had solo exhibitions at a number of significant institutions: the Brooklyn Museum, Wexner Center for the Arts, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and at the Drawing Center in New York City, where I once worked. He's collaborated on feature films, most notably with director Ang Lee on sequences for his award-winning film, The Life of Pi. And most recently had a large cycle of monumental paintings, the Great Lakes cycle that began with the Grand Rapids Art Museum, the Chicago Cultural Center, traveled to the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland, to the Haggerty Museum of Art at Marquette University, and a number of other places, and is just about to open an exhibition of works this evening at Speroni Westwater Gallery in New York, and will be opening an exhibition of works, I believe, shipwrecks at Guild Hall out on Long Island a little bit later on in 2021.
It's actually opening now at Peabody Essex first in February.
In 2021 in February, Peabody Essex, and then at Guild Hall.
You want to be in the cold witch lynching capital of North America.
So I'm extremely happy to see you well, and to have you join us for this conversation.
Great to see you too.
You and I can't remember when we first met, but I think it was sort of in and around the center. When was it?
Fong.
Oh, that's right, at the Brooklyn Rail through Fong Bui. That's right. Yeah. And it's been quite a while. Although I have to say that I remember 2 episodes of coming into contact with your work prior to our meeting. The first, when I was working in the logistics and architecture office of the Brooklyn Museum, and you opened Manifest Destiny there sometime in the early 2000s. 2004. And then again at the Baldwin Gallery in Aspen, an exhibition called Big Weather.
Oh, right after.
Which was soon after.
Yeah.
So I've been familiar with your work a little bit before you and I met. Probably helped our getting along. And well,
you came highly recommended and respected. So you were vetted.
So I've put together some slides. I've grabbed some images so that we can talk about those. But I wanted to sort of get a sense from you about what you are working on now, and what are your sort of main concerns and your main interests at present with projects that you're embarking on. I always like to start with today, and then we can work backwards a little bit into previous projects.
All right. Well, I'm still working on the last piece for the Shipwreck show. It's a painting of treasure. I asked a series of anthropologists and archaeologists about what is like the holy grail, literally, of lost treasure. So I'm doing a sort of encyclopedic painting of treasure that's been lost from shipwrecks, falling through the abyss, being illuminated by bioluminescent organisms. So I'm working on that right now.
What are some
Um,
of those? What are some of those holy grail items?
um, you call, there's, you know, I have a list. It's a goblet, it's a sword, it's some jewelry, it's a this, it's a, you know, a piece of fabric, which is purple. You caught me off guard because I should have that list in front of me, but I
That's all right.
wasn't really. Once I sort of made the decision about what things are, I kind of lose interest in the name of it because now I'm involved in like figuring out how to make a painting of it. But you get the idea. So then after that, I don't really know what I'm going to be doing in the future. You know, I have a lot of logistical stuff to deal with a show opening in, you know, basically 2 months in Salem, and working on the catalog. I'm working on a works on paper monograph that I'm excited about, that David Riminelli and Helen Molesworth are writing essays for, that's being published by Damiani. Delmonico is doing the other book. I'm involved in some movie projects that I'm hoping finally get some traction. We had a pre-production moment, and then the director's other project got greenlit, so they ran off to do that. So they're filming that. So dealing with the house in Warren is going to be, you know, adjusting, because my studio is no longer in Manhattan.
Yeah, that's a big change. Your studio has been in Manhattan
Yeah. So I'm
for
renovating that right now.
since the early 1990s. I mean, I think that
1987, Jonathan.
1987.
Come on. When you were in elementary school.
I wish. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about here is the sort of larger context of your interest in the environment and activism. If anybody follows you on Instagram, which I encourage them to do,
Yeah, I could use some more, you know, some followers. So
some more
get on that
followers.
now, or I'm not talking anymore. I'm looking. I want to see everyone get on that. Yeah, go on.
It's a pretty regular feed of work that you've been producing, but also you're an avid consumer of headlines with regard to environmental policy, environmental agencies, and everything
That's
else.
an unfortunate word, consumer, since that's part of the problem. But let's just say that I follow the news, which has been nothing but dire. Well, basically since I was born, but there's been a couple of moments of, you know, worthy of optimism. I think Biden winning the presidency is not going to save the world, but it's definitely going to slow things down as we head off a cliff. So anyone that thinks that, you know, we're out of trouble is not really informed about what's been going on really since humans left Africa 1.8 million years ago.
Not a nihilistic attitude at all.
No, it's not.
It's just reality.
It's called journalism.
So for the people who are joining us here, when do you think
Hominids left Africa, not humans.
when did your environmental consciousness begin, do you think?
When I was born, I always was fascinated by the plants that were growing out of the cracks of the sidewalk, or wondering what pigeons were doing and how they could make it through the winter. And my mom is an anthropologist, so she actually knew something about that and loved animals. So I always saw nature as this thing that was underappreciated and in trouble since I was a kid. So I went to Peru when I was a kid and saw, I mean, the struggle that definitely humans have, but every other animal and plant has in the world, you know, faced with trying to put food on the table, literally.
And one thing I think that comes across in the work that you produced over time is that you're not a romantic with regard to the natural world necessarily.
I share, you know, it's an interesting question. Romantic with a capital R. You know, I love those tropes, and I'm very sympathetic to those impulses of the transcendence of nature. But my relationship to nature is that, you know, since humans escaped Africa or wandered elsewhere, is nature without humans? I mean, what is nature? There's so many ideas about nature, you know, that come from, you know, the intellectual, academic sphere. There's so many things are constantly changing. So I share it. The closest thing I have to a religious experience, and I'm completely not theological in any way, is being around nature I spent time in Antarctica, Tasmania, Madagascar, but I'm also very painfully aware of the impact that me as an individual getting there to those places have on those places. So there is a sense of the paradox of self-loathing and being alive and part of this system that is capitalism, that is literally, like a moth eating a rug.
But you couldn't have been born with that disposition. Was this something that came
I got
from
some
familial
comedy
background? Like, I mean,
around, Marxist or proto-Marxist for me, and there's so many conflicting ideas about this stuff that are irreconcilable. Really, you just to exist in a culture is virtually impossible without having impacts on the things that we're talking about. So it's just observation.
Right. And so,
flush the toilet in a city, where does it go? Look out the window, there's the river.
That's true. But do you, I mean, you must have some sense of either hopefulness, or put it this way, there are sort of different schools of thought with regard to the future plight of both humanity and the kind of biosphere of the globe. One is dedicated to a kind of technological solution, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, a more sustainable method of
Are you in California?
living and survival. I do. Now,
I mean, what do you think those fires are doing? I mean, that idea and having fires is, I mean, come on, are you kidding me?
Sure.
If this had been 50 years ago, time is our biggest enemy. I think we're headed in the right direction. I think the culture is finally catching up to stuff that if it had been 50 years ago, I'd be optimistic. But because of the math, it's not about my belief. It's just, if you look at the math and you see what's happening with fresh water and biodiversity,
right,
there's no way to be optimistic.
But even your work in your
doesn't mean I can't have pleasure individually.
Sure.
And try to enjoy my life, and that is the schizo mental health issue of being alive now.
But what about, I mean, do you get a sense of equanimity, the fact that there have been large scale extinction events in the past?
No, not one. Listen, the Earth is going to be fine without us.
Right. That's sort of what I'm talking about.
If you don't want to have like raccoons as your big game animals and white-tailed deer, and that's it, and rats, and you probably have to eat them, then that's going to be your children's idea of nature.
But that's ultimately a concern about humanity, right? I mean, that's
biodiversity.
Yeah, but
I believe there's an ethical responsibility to, and I'm not theological, but they are God's children. That is an incredible library of the history of the earth that is beyond fathoming how beautiful and profound it is. And it's slipping through our fingers. And if that doesn't make you fucking pissed, then you should open your eyes. But there's no solution.
And you know that I'm playing devil's advocate here. The capacity, though, to, let's say, freeze a moment in time where you maintain the biodiversity that exists at any given point in the history of the planet, is also a kind of fool's errand, right? The idea to romanticize and to idealize any given moment and say, we have to try and save and preserve and conserve everything, versus allowing the dynamic system and complex systems of the biosphere to play out.
There is no this is all human induced. This has nothing to do with anything other than human activity. Humans are the authors of all these issues we're talking about. We could have a separate conversation about the history of evolution, and that's a fascinating conversation, but that's not what we're talking about.
Sure.
So you want to have humans, you can have biodiversity, and I worry about fresh water and places for humans to live in the future. So you can really take nature off the table.
So it ultimately really is a kind of a humanistic perspective. When it comes down to
it's a human loathing perspective. I mean, I love individual people, but come on. 70 million people voted for someone we won't name. And
Um,
how
I
come I don't know any of these people?
well, that I think is
I
that's a
do. They're
different
like
that's a
secrets.
different question. It's a different problem.
Right. So, I mean, it's no joke. You're a higher education institution, right? Graduate school.
Yep.
That other person appeals to people that aren't educated. Can we call them stupid?
No, you just think,
Why?
but there's plenty of educated people who have voted for this person too.
Yes, and then they would be selfish assholes. So it's either stupid or selfish assholes.
Let's move, let's look at some of the more recent work and we
Let's
can get
hide in
into,
some art.
let's hide in some art. Let's look at let's art wash our feelings of self-loathing
Get me out of
engage.
this. I'm starting to sweat. Is it too early for a martini?
It's never too early for a martini.
Yes,
Alexis.
it is. I can't go to an opening. Fucked up.
All right, hold on one second. Let me put this together. Can you see that screen?
Yep.
I'm hoping everybody can. So I pulled some of these from the
Try to get single image though. That's confusing.
How about that one?
That's clear. That's good.
So this is from the series Wallace's Line,
Yes.
that from a couple of years ago, I believe.
Yeah. This is actually the body of work that, or I don't know how many you're going to show, but the Wallace's Line project is really about my lifelong love affair with Alfred Russel Wallace and his life's work. And the paintings are really either moments in his life or paintings about his ideas. The great Victorian naturalist who co-discovered natural selection independently of Darwin and is often left off the Wikipedia page.
And
Wallace's Line, let me explain.
Yeah. Give us a little background.
All right. So that's a map of the world as well as an abstract painting. You're looking down at the top of Australia, New Guinea, and then you have the tip of Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia. So Wallace's Line is the observation that Wallace made while he was in that part of the world, that there's an area where kangaroos stop living and monkeys start living. And why is that? Well, because during the Ice Age, animals couldn't get across, so they were isolated in their own ecosystems, and therefore there are no orangutans in Australia and New Guinea and no tree kangaroos in Asia because they were separated for millennia. That's a fascinating observation.
Yeah.
Biogeography. Next.
Yeah. I have to see if we have notes, but hold on. What I want to talk about here is this. As we're preparing for the talk, I was going back and I was looking at a bunch of your work. There's a kind of flow back and forth between, I think, what a lot of people would call a kind of illustration or hyperrealism, figure drawings and capturing of animals and people and things like that in a sort of fully descriptive sense, and this more, again, I don't want to call it fully abstract, but there's a real let's say luxuriating in material, like the paint and the raw matter. And I think that comes across a lot, especially in the watercolor pieces, where you sort of really allow the watercolors to kind of do their thing.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about this, what's the push and pull between those two, and what has been the push and pull between those two sort of like modes of representation, both for you and then sort of broadly in the way that you've addressed the subject matter, the sort of ecological, the geographical, the natural history subject matter over the course of your career. Is there a sort of, to put it stupidly, is there some sort of like allegorical relationship that you can draw between those two, or is it just that this is the kind of way that you've built up this set of artistic tools?
Well, there's a very specific mechanism that occurred to me in the mid 80s when I was struggling to reconcile what does it mean to be an artist in 1984 and also have this content that I want to make work about that might not be like hip to the moment. Natural history, plants and animals, stuff like that. So what I found my way into that initially by using a type of color field painting as a place to put stuff. And I would never be interested in either of those languages without the other for my work. It's just a matter of which volume is turned up more than the other. I always felt that the challenge of being a painter is to really challenge yourself with paint and what can you do with paint. And I'm very fascinated and love the history of painting, from obviously Dürer through Morris Louis and everyone else. And I love using the encyclopedia of the palette, pun intended, of that great almost biodiversity of painting. And then the thing that I felt was radical and possibly the most interesting thing I was doing was placing within that context and sort of keying it up and giving it new meaning, hopefully for me, was finding a way to have natural history iconography that told a story about the, you know, ideas about that stuff and my relationship to it. So I always like that collision of almost languages that don't belong together, that hopefully have enough tension to be compelling. When, you know, when people say, what is it, realist? I mean, I do whatever it takes to get the image across. I'll use photorealism, whatever that means. I mean,
Right.
It's not really photorealism, because photorealism is mimicking a photograph.
Right.
I don't know what it is. It's just getting the, I mean, if you're dealing with this, if you want to have a Sumatran orangutan and you want a Komodo monitor, you better be specific about what the damn thing looks like. And that's what that type of painting is about, being specific. And that's the point, right? It wouldn't mean anything if that were a squirrel monkey. Right?
Right.
So that's why I think that there's a linguistic and iconographic, and they're not necessarily the same thing, even though they overlap all the time.
Right. Because I think that this is, I mean, this painting in particular I like a lot too. Also, the fact that you've got a different register of representation in terms of the map and the sort of cartography, which carries its own kind of representational scheme,
Yep.
and it's
Maps are fascinating.
accurate and realist in a way, but it's a convention that requires
Right, and that
some
dark
kind of meaning.
shadow shape is really the plate that those land masses are sitting on. The reason there is Wallace's line.
Right. Right.
That's a small painting. That's 18 by 24 inches.
So here, this is another sort of Azure Kingfisher from the same year.
Yeah.
A sort of a different sort of combination of pictorial or
Yeah, in a
painting
certain way, you could say
registers.
this is photorealism, because that water is using the language of photography, that sort of miraculous view of what happens to a splash, and
Right.
high-speed photography and stuff like that. So
Right.
I would say that this is about the history of photography and the miraculous view as much as anything.
Right. And so I want to, and here I wanted to, this is something that we see in your work all the time, and even in just the selection that I've grabbed to look through here, will, you know, have a demonstration of it. The simultaneous below water and above water, or below
Yes.
ground or above ground, or the taking of a section through
Or seeing into an
the
animal
landscape.
or a human.
And so these sort of they're not like impossible views, but there's this kind of the use of the picture plane as a slide, right? That
Or a
carves
piece of
into the
glass,
side,
or
a piece of
yeah.
glass, right? That like a laboratory slide that sort of cuts through
Or a vivarium or a diorama.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so this is, you know, this is something that you work with all the time. I mean, it's a pretty
Yeah.
common
When I
strategy.
first started thinking about being a painter, you sort of like start to think about what's not part of the vernacular of the moment. And I was overjoyed to discover that nobody was smart enough to make paintings about using those types of pictorial strategies. So I jumped on it.
Claim the territory. But it also allows you, to, I mean, I think this is something that is interesting. It allows you in many ways, in a single image or a single painting, to sort of to create a kind of diptych, or to kind of to address two different or simultaneous worlds that allow us then to sort of think across these various different registers. So here, Forces of Change, same. This is a very large painting, right?
Pretty big.
And that gives us the underwater scene,
Above and below,
right,
time, non-specific geography. Even though there are specific places, it's not a place.
right.
They're cherry picked. Obviously, the allegory of the sea monster, which is basically an elaborate reconfiguration of E. coli.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and bacteria and viruses floating around. How prescient was I?
Yeah, exactly.
What a genius.
And but always, in some sense, the I mean, here it's not entirely clear, but there's a temporality of always looking back from perhaps a not too distant future. Although I think here, when you're looking at the kind of decaying industrial bulk, this is the kind of thing that dots the Rust Belt now, even as we speak.
Well, it's different parts of Ohio and upstate New York.
Combined.
Yes, Niagara Falls, parts of Buffalo, parts of different parts of Ohio, and Lockport, New York. That's I know you can't see it on the screen, but there's a lock up at the vanishing point on the right where your head is, Jonathan, on my screen.
Okay.
Let me see if I can reconfigure this.
Yeah, it's on the right hand side.
Option. Hold on.
Yeah, you can see the locks up on the right and the bridge going over the right hand side.
So that's the first lock that connected the Great Lakes to the outside. So there's specific things that this is about, and yes, but this is really about the past, not the future. This is about the past and not really the future either. It's a time. This is actually organized left to right. So this is called Cascade. And this is basically an inventory of resources that have been exploited by humans around the Great Lakes from the Pleistocene, 10,000 years ago, when it was covered by glacier. The Great Lakes are just a glorified puddle, right? It's hard to imagine how big that sheet of ice must have been if that's the puddle. And then the species of fish that have been exploited, shipwrecks, resources, timber, mining, stuff like that.
And so what I find interesting about this too is there's this kind of combination, this sort of willingness, almost collage of all of this material together, but put within a I wouldn't call it quite seamless, right? I mean, painting allows you a lot of leeway in terms of combining these things. But I think anybody looking at one of these works understands that this is a fabricated scene, a constructed image with a lot of different realist elements to create almost a kind of fantastical landscape or catalog of effects.
Well, I really would see it differently. It's more of an inventory of historical moments and information that gives a sense of place, albeit not a specific one. And there's a long tradition, not in terms of art history, but educational images that I'm drawing on. A lot of the impetus for this project, and I was very clear about it from the beginning, was there's this cycle of images produced by Michigan Fish and Wildlife or whatever that are posters of specific habitats in and around the Great Lakes that sort of show the landscape and fishing and so on and so forth in a very idealized, sort of non-threatening way that irritated me to the point where I wanted to fix it. So they're in very much the same format, even though they would go in some, elementary school. So, kids that if they're in a rural situation, they're like, oh, there's the trout I caught or something like that. Right. And then you could get a sense of where it lived, but the humans are never a part of the landscape.
Do you ever consider your the kind of level of control or the level of manipulation that you exert as a painter in this type of work as kind of a parallel to the kind of level of control and manipulation that humans exert on the planet itself?
Oh, that's interesting. I know, but I like that idea.
I mean, we'll come to those in a second. I'll stay with this one, but there's a kind of the ability to represent a canvas at this scale with this many different species sort of all sort of combined together to play a kind of omnipotent being that can take various different locales and regions and put them together. It's like it not doing justice to the landscape, or not looking at the landscape or looking at the natural world as something that has to be represented on its own terms and is there to be cut, manipulated, exploited, however benevolently or
Definitely.
right, that one might think about it. I
Is
don't
that
know.
a question?
It's a little bit of a question. I mean, I know
I
you
mean,
probably haven't thought about it in those terms, but
well, I mean, the point of the damn painting is exactly that. So I would remove the benevolent part.
stick to the malevolent piece.
Well, I mean, fish are no good alive to these people, right?
You have to institute a new school of pictorial education called malevolent painting.
Right.
Malevolent art. These are some of the watercolor works, Bubbly Creek and Chimera. And Chimera I wanted to point to particularly because this is a work that looks very familiar to some of the things that you did for the Life of Pi, and the studies that you did on the movie, where these
Yeah.
kinds of combinations, almost like the Archambolto
Yeah.
aggregates.
Composite amalgamations.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And the watercolors are you've done quite a lot of these, but they feel very different than the oil paintings. Again, it has something to do with this kind of this push and pull of control between the paint itself that you're working with and the images that you're trying to conjure.
Yeah, I mean, they're apples and oranges. It's just a different world, and I enjoy them all equally, and it's all, it's like you just have to put on a different hat.
Are there more? I mean, do you look to the watercolor work as? Is it a kind
I'm
of?
having a show of watercolors opening in about an hour, so you're going to say, is it equal?
No. I'm saying, is it more generative, right? I mean, I think that I've been to the studio and I've seen you work on some of the oil paintings, and this requires sort of an immense amount of control and activity and planning and everything else. Do the watercolors give you ideas for how to do some of the combinations and some of the I don't want to call them tricks, but some of the things that suggest themselves in the oil paintings? Is there
They're really
that kind of relationship?
It's so much more organic than that. It's like, all right, today I'm doing this and I have until 3:00 and it better friggin' work. And that's the way I treat the paintings too. When I'm starting them, it's just different materials. They have a mind of their own. It's very alchemaic. I have an idea of what I'm after, but you better be flexible, which I love, because, or else they'd just be, I don't know what I would be doing. But part of the work is really what the materials do, as you said in the beginning. That's definitely probably less true in the oil paintings that you've been showing. Some of the paintings I've been making recently are about that. The weather drawings that when you saw those in Aspen are really about taking oil paint and letting it, there you go, letting it do its thing and be evocative, and the Victor Hugo effect, right?
Right. These are some of my favorite works of yours.
Thank you.
The big weather paintings. This one, the fire painting from 2006, obviously was pretty poignant this past summer in California. Even though I don't think this is a California landscape that you were looking at.
What a visionary, right? It is.
It is.
It's a baseball diamond.
And then Yellow Hurricane with Bridge.
Yeah, that's the Key West shit.
Right.
I mean, the point is, and besides joking around and saying I'm a genius, the point is that you don't have to be a genius to see this stuff coming in terms of content. And there's plenty of lame ass nature painters. I mean, every artist I know thinks whatever genre they're doing attracts the stupidest artists, but there's nothing dumber than a nature artist. And it's not for lack of good intentions. It's just too sanctimonious.
Right. Not malevolent enough.
Not disrespectful enough.
Right. Or not realist enough.
Or whatever. Not good enough. Yeah. So there's a ghetto of nature art that I don't want to be a part of.
This is another one of my favorite works from roughly the same time, just because this was the neighborhood of Manhattan that we used to occupy all the time, downtown. And
I used to live in the building. The reason I made this painting, it was actually a commission, if you can believe it. My upstairs neighbor, if you look in the painting, do you have a cursor that you can move around?
I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. Go down to the left to that building across the street, up to the right, to the slightly, one more building. There, that building, I used to live in that building in the 90s until about 2002. And that's on White Street in Church. And my upstairs neighbor approached me several years later and said, we make a painting of where we used to live. And I said, yes, of course. And then I thought about how to make it interesting. And there's a Richard Estes painting of this view,
right,
which you may be familiar with. And I've always wanted to meet. I almost had dinner with him last year, and it got rescheduled or postponed. We never did it.
Richard Estes, the great photorealist.
He is by far my favorite. Yeah. He's the Morris Lewis of photorealists.
For sure.
So I took that, and the painting I believe was made in 1972, and I sort of dissected it and turned it into a ruin. And that's what the painting's about. And then the guy who owns the painting, who's in the financial industry, said, oh, it's when the mortgage rates, the interest rate wasn't raised, or was raised. And that's what happened.
You mean after the 2008?
No, in the with Reagan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, that's how that painting came into existence.
That's when they
big. It's like 72 inches.
It's a big way. Yeah, but there's getting back to this. I mean, one of the things that I guess makes you not a nature painter is that you've got a very let's say cavalier is not the right word, but disrespectful sense of temporality.
Well,
you paint from
irreverent.
Right, irreverent sense of temporality, and a lot of the work, projects forward into a future, or sometimes imagines a kind of
an alternate
future,
present,
or sometimes an alternate past too, which I've always found important. And it's not in some of the I think in some ways like the watercolors don't do this, but a lot of the Disney World from 2005, this kind of like bizarre future post-apocalyptic scenery.
Mark my words, that's not bizarre.
But there's this kind of there's this sort of science fiction scenic aspect to it, which is it seems to have become the kind of state disposition these days, right? I mean, nothing takes place that doesn't take place in some sort of post-apocalyptic sensibility.
I mean, it's just what's there, I mean, it's been obvious forever.
This was the work that showed at the Brooklyn Museum.
24 feet long.
Yeah, huge thing. Which is also
24 feet.
The irreverence of our computer screens these days doesn't.
If it looks good on your phone.
What was give us a little bit of the background on this desire to kind of address I mean, this is some New York, some not.
How about
New
I tell
York.
you about it?
Yeah, tell us about it.
I was at a dinner sitting next to the then director of the Brooklyn Museum, Arnold Lehman, and quick on my feet, I thought, what does the Brooklyn Museum have if not envy of Manhattan? And I thought, why don't I suggest to him I make a painting about Brooklyn that would be about what it would look like in the future after climate change. So this was in 1999. And it took 5 years for the painting to come around. He said, oh, that sounds really interesting. Why don't we have it be part of the grand reopening when we do this renovation? And I said, sounds great. So to make a long story short, I reached out to a number of scientist friends, including Cynthia Rosenzweig at Columbia, James Hansen, who was at NASA at the time, and dozens of other people. And I started asking them questions about, if we had it started out 1,000 years in the future. And while I was even making the painting, it became clear that these issues were going to be hundreds of years in the future. Little did I know they were going to be within 100 years of now. I made the painting 16 years ago. And I asked them a lot of questions about what would happen to the ecology, the sea level, and so on and so forth. And then I consulted some architects, and we sort of created this landscape of looking east towards Brooklyn from the Manhattan shoreline, imagining that the sea level had risen 82 feet, and what would be the retrofitted attempts by the Army Corps of Engineers and various other bodies that would try to adjust to sea level rise, to no avail, obviously. And so I retrofitted it with sea levels and all sorts of bridge updates and failures and stuff like that. And that's how it was made, or thought of, at least.
Yeah, I think this is another great example of this kind of above below.
Yeah.
And in this case, mostly below from the problem of sea level rise, or the idea of sea level rise. But this position that the viewer is in some sense almost outside of the painting, right?
Yes, and that's why you see that sort of skirt of space in the foreground. I was really kind of sick of like having it just become earth if you went below the water, like a flat plane. So I started to play around with different ideas about, you're in this sort of nowhere land of you don't exist in this world, and you're looking in on it, almost like some sort of another type of miraculous view.
Right. But with these interesting moments that sort of almost break that slice, right? That break that picture plane, because it's like you have the submarine that sort of lifts
jutting
over
out
the edge, and the
jellyfish in this nowhere land,
right, in this nowhere space, and then and it's kind of unclear what the spatial relationship is as the lens kind of moves around the edge too. You get that kind of fishbowl effect.
Right, and those are sort of science fiction illustration tropes.
Right.
There's no genre that I won't try to include.
I'll come back to that one, but since you mentioned science fiction, this work, Biosphere Laboratory, from the early 1990s,
1993,
which has a very direct reference to the great science fiction movie of this is Silent Running. Is that the?
Well, it is Silent Running.
Right.
Silent Running is kind of a mixed bag. I think it's incredibly powerful. I don't know if it holds up that well as a cinematic experience, but it certainly is an artifact that has tremendous power and resonance for a lot of people. And it was directed by the great Douglas Trumbull, who spent most of his life being a visual effects artist on movies like
Blade Runner,
Close Encounters, Blade Runner,
right.
Tree of Life more recently. So he's a visionary, and I've actually corresponded with him a couple of times, and he's been very generous to me. He lives in Mass, and
this was also right around the time, if I recall, where there was a lot of in the news about Biosphere and the experiment down in the area.
Yes.
Right.
So this was. I imagined that the movie. I have to stand up because I'm sick of sitting. That the movie really didn't. There was no way to tell the whole story of what was going on once you left these places on the ship alone, or to have its own. Let's say there's no husbandry. So the abandoned diorama or zoo enclosure that has to do with Australia, what would happen there, and so on and so forth. And then I started to think about, well, there must be a laboratory. It's really an excuse to create this, imaginative retro future laboratory. Very much, even though it's before, no, is it before or after Stuart Gordon's Reanimator? But it certainly is in the spirit of Reanimator.
So talk a little bit more then about your kind of you're skirting the edge of the cinematic land and your desire to sort of work in and with the movie environment. I mean, if
That
anybody
reminds me, I have to talk to my agent after. No,
you talk to anybody who follows your Instagram will know that images of your work are you're constantly putting up stills from movies. I don't know if these are ones that you're watching or ones that you're sort of scrolling through on your computer.
it doesn't. I mean, I've been around long enough. If I'm not watching it now, it's somewhere in my brain.
And I'm always playing a game as you're putting these images up so that I'm not reading the caption and trying to figure out which movie it is. And
well, I never try to have the caption. I give the date.
Right.
That's your clue.
Right. It's a good game. So, how did that, how do you see your work as a painter sort of intersecting with that sort of the interest in history of filmmaking? And
I never thought I'd be a painter. I didn't even, when I was a kid, it was the height of minimalism, and I knew what I was interested in, but I didn't believe there was a place for me in the so-called art world, because imagine me and, Richard Serra on the same wall. I do now and it happens, but at that time it was, very sort of, fascistically stringent. So I went to art school, Rhode Island School of Design, thinking I was going to be somehow in the film industry. I grew up loving movies, and I saw a lot of my interests in moments of movies, and that's really where I thought I'd end up. So I've always had that sensibility, and luckily the art industry changed enough to accommodate what I was interested in. I was always going to be doing what I was doing somewhere.
When do you think, was it the late 80s? Was it the 1980s that you felt like that change happened, where it sort of moved away? The early 80s moved away from this sort of the minimalist orthodoxy?
Or even 1980, when, you had the German painters like Kiefer and Polka were making some sorts of like eccentric pop art paintings, or, guilty history paintings. And so I related to those, and I said, well, if I frame what I'm doing as a type of American pop art, right? We all have a history of, the Golden Field Guides and National Geographic and whatever. Then if you're making paintings about that media, that's pop culture on a certain level. And that's how I could sort of like sneak it in the back door.
I'm going to stop the share here and encourage everybody who's joined us to ask questions, because we've still got you for another about 10 minutes, I would say. Be mindful that you need to get down to the gallery. Why, in your opinion, do you see other artists, or do you see the art world doing enough of addressing the question of the environment?
I certainly hope not, and I don't want them to do it.
Why not?
Because I want it to be mine.
Because you want it to be yours. I mean, there's given the sort of the political dispensation of the art and cultural fields, I think that most everybody in and around the artistic community, believes in human the causes of climate change, the dire effects, and the needs to address it. I'm curious, from your perspective, though, like there aren't that many artists who make this their subject matter.
Yeah, well, there are. What's her face, who just had that show at the Shed? It's pioneer, certainly before me. Mark Dion is
Agnes Dennis, you mean?
Exactly.
The one who did and
yeah,
she's amazing. But her work is not. But Dennis is not, her work, I wouldn't say is like 100% environmental, right? I mean, you don't look at that and say.
Neither is mine. Smithson had that strain in him, especially in his writings. He was a big gateway, gave me a permission to do it. You find ways to make your own permission. Mark Dion, as I just mentioned, I think has been very, certainly has been doing it as long as I have, and has his own way of doing very, challenging and interesting work about similar issues. We collaborate together often and are very close friends. There's generations younger than us that are, go in and out of that. So, I mean, I don't know what the responsibility is. Is that art's job? It's like, just be a good artist. Whatever you decide to do it about, that's what matters as an artist. I mean, I can't think of anything else that I could make work about, because those are the most pressing issues that I can't justify doing anything else to myself. And then I try to find a way to be, challenged and make work that I'm interested in the face of those ideas, but it's constantly back and forth.
Yeah, because it's the art and cultural fields today, I think, they're very much informed and energized by politics, right?
Yeah,
and
I see someone down here, that's Jake Keel, and I think it's his uncle, or Ted Keel was a big fan of Manifest Destiny, and we did some programming around that painting. Hi, Jake, how are you?
Hey, man, how you doing?
Good, good. Where are you?
I'm in Punta Cana, in the Dominican Republic.
That's what I thought. Hope you're hanging in there. It's been a little rough weather-wise, right?
Yeah, it's been a wild year.
Yeah. So
hey, great to hear you. Great to check in, man. It's a great talk.
Nice,
I love
to catch up a little bit. Hold on, the cat's playing in the paper bag. Hold on.
As cats will do. So for everybody that's on the Zoom with us, if you have questions, please put them into the chat.
You have a question for this cat? This cat is responsible for more dead wildlife than, no, she never goes outside, but she wants to kill everything.
One of the worst invasive species on the planet.
Yep.
Outside of humans.
Cute as hell.
How do you think your shift up to the wilds of Litchfield County is gonna sort of shape your perspective on things?
How the hell would I know? I don't know yet. I might be painting just pieces of or like hard edge abstraction, just to get out.
I was going to ask.
I'm sick of damn nature.
I mean, this is you're one of the most prominent nature artists who's lived in New York City your almost your entire life.
Exactly. Longing perpetually.
Right. So the desire for nature has informed all of this work, and now you're going to be subjected to it in this kind of.
There's otters in the property.
Right.
On the property, we have a covered bridge, and they live in the river that goes through the property. So the covered bridge connects to two houses.
Can we expect an endless series of cute otter paintings?
Absolutely. Far more successful.
If you had advice for or anything you wanted to tell to sort of a younger generation of artists who are just sort of setting out in this in this world where, I mean, I think the climate change, environmental politics have been ever present since the 1970s. I think they've been renewed almost every kind of 20 years. There was a sort of new push for it in the 1990s, and I think we're seeing it again more recently. But that has created, as we know, a sort of, the sense of kind of impending doom that a lot of younger people are sort of entering into and realizing the a kind of fear and anger and disappointment with the world that is being bequeathed to them.
They would be right.
Yeah, and they would be right. But how do you, if you as an artist, you obviously take a lot of energy from the work that you're doing, and it's you're finding it's not a refuge, but you're a way of managing.
It is a refuge.
That.
Hold on, the cat will not be obedient. I wonder why.
She knows.
I have to hold the bags. Keep it from getting in.
What would you tell a younger artist to focus on and how to manage going forward?
I mean, if they're really going to do anything, whatever I say doesn't matter. It's a tough road that you better have strong feelings about it to get you through the ups and downs, because you're not doing it for the money. I guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, when you were starting out in the 1980s and the art world didn't seem to be aligned with the kind of work that you wanted to make, what kind of resources were you looking at to help keep you going in that direction?
It was aligned enough that I never had a job ever, so don't get confused.
So don't get a job?
No. I mean, I don't have any skills, so I couldn't get a job, but I was successful right out of the gate. And that was one of the things that I had to insist on for myself because I had no options. I didn't have a wealthy family or anything like that.
Got it. So just keep going. Keep
Be
just
tough as shit. And all you need is one person to buy one thing. And that's all you need. It's not like, you have to sell 1 million views on Netflix to make a living. You just sell one of them, you're in business.
Right. So our group is relatively reticent, it looks like. And I know it's getting up to the hour.
Yeah, what's wrong with you people?
I think they're
right. I'm taking a screenshot, and I'll make sure if you don't ask me a question, make sure you never get a show.
You get the
right. You're fucked now.
Listen, Alexis, it's always great to talk to you. I appreciate you taking the time. Congratulations on the new show.
Thanks. It's online. If you can't make it to New York, and I don't recommend anyone travel really, but there's pretty good installation shots I just saw on Sprony Westwater website. So check it out.
We will.
And thanks for all the great questions. I love Devil's Advocate.
Well, someone's got to push back against your, undying nihilism.
It's just open your eyes.
It's good to see you. It's good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time with us.
Of course. All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.